Good, back in the kitchen again. I must say, you'll notice we're having a Bovril again. And I've got to say a big thank you to Tony Standish, who sent us not only another massive supply of Bovril, but also a box of 300 biscuits. So it's amazed us, it really has amazed us that people watching us like things that much to send us presents like that. So it's really, yeah, beef and biscuit presents. So we really do appreciate it. It's really quite amazing. Right, I'm going to make one of these for me, one of these for Trev. You see, actually, there's one big benefit of Bovril, and that's that I can't make it that far wrong, really. Unlike tea and coffee, you put hot water in, and basically you've got your boiled bovine. So easy peasy. Right, let's go and have a look. So, last week, or the week before, when I was last doing this, I mentioned that there was a new arrival which we hadn't revealed yet. Here you go, Trev, bit of meat for you.
Cheers, bud.
And Nat didn't mention it again last week, so we should go and do the big reveal. If you follow me down here, this amazingly barn find looking car is our latest project. So I'm going to put my boiled cow down on the bonnet here. So this is one of those sort of looks to a car which you almost never see. You see people saying barn find about just about everything that's not been used for more than 2 months. But this thing just totally has that look of a genuine barn find, and it hasn't been used since the 80s. So what is it, you might ask? It's a Jensen CV8, and it's the car that Jensen made prior to the Interceptor. They only made 500 of them. This is a Mark III, which they made 100 and something, I think, of these. And it was an absolutely incredible car in its day. It was one of the fastest production cars in the world. I believe it was the fastest 4-seat production car in the world. And was an awesome combination of British and American. It's got just a good old thunking great American V8 in it, so for bags of torque, and then a British built body, which, as Jay Leno described it, is either the most beautiful ugly car ever made or the ugliest, ugliest pretty car ever made. It's actually well worth going and have a look at Jay Leno's garage video about his Jensen CV8. I should give you a bit more information about the car as a whole, because I don't want to go totally into the history of it at the moment. But yeah, this is our latest project. It's going to be a Restomod project, so we're going really to town on re-engineering it all. These have a fiberglass upper body and a separate bolted on steel chassis. So the chassis is basically a tubular frame with then all of the sheet steel panel work that comes up to form the sort of bulkhead and the lower inner metalwork of the body. And then the fiberglass body has flanges that mate up with that. So we'll have all the joy of trying to prise those two apart when we strip the rest of it apart. The doors are aluminium skinned, and that's about the only metal outer bodywork there is. The rest of it's basically fiberglass throughout. And it looks actually to be, although the paint finish is well past it, the fiberglass underneath, although this is tempting fate, looks pretty good. So we're going to start stripping this down next week. Plans for it are pretty impressive. We're going to have American power in the front again. We're going to do a crate Chevy engine of some description. Now, at the moment, the plan is LT4, so the newer direct injection supercharged V8 in the front. He wants auto, so we're going to do, I think, the 8-speed GM auto transmission. We're going to do our own independent rear end in it. They're a live axle standard. Now, they're a very strong live axle. They're a Salisbury 4HA, which is the same as was used in a lot of cars of the era, Jags and such like. Very strong axle and would take the power, but putting 600 plus horsepower through a live leaf sprung axle is probably not a great idea. So we're going to go independent rear end. We'll totally redesign the front suspension just so it's sturdier and a bit more of a modern design. It's not horrific as it is, to be fair. It's a double wishbone design, but it's got a bit of an antiquated steering rack. It's not the strongest looking design, and we want to put obviously huge brakes on it to bring this thing back down from high speed. So we're going to need to beef all that lot up. Big question mark at the moment is whether we base it around the standard chassis underneath, or whether we completely redesign it. And that decision might be made by how rotten we find the chassis to be once we've stripped it down. It doesn't look horrific at a glance, but with it, you know, we've worked on old cars long enough now to know that first glance is not the thing you want to go on. We shall see. Next week we'll start stripping this down and find out what sort of condition it's in. There's going to be a lot of other details. The interior, we're going to redesign a lot of it. It's actually a really nice fundamental shape. The dash is quite nice. And there's nothing that displeasing about it, but we just want to improve some of the details. So all the instrumentation will be replicating what's there, but with modern stepper motor internals. We'll put modern audio and navigation in it. It'll have a modern air conditioning system in it. Plan is to have adjustable ride height suspension on it, and we'll tie that into switchable modes on the transmission, so we can basically select between a sport mode and a comfort mode in there. And we're thinking they have this selector ride control, which was originally a suspension adjustment control, which I think probably didn't work from new, to be honest. But we are thinking about trying to keep that original control and repurpose it to switch between the different modes on the transmission and suspension. We'll be designing a new center console for it. It's going to have a tunnel mount shifter for the auto box. But we're not going to totally radically redesign it. We're just trying to improve on what's there and add all the modern tech. The Webasto roof, although they're quite a cool feature of cars of this era, there's almost nothing in the way of weatherproofing on them. It's really quite remarkable, to be honest. There's no sealing system on this whatsoever. All it relies on is this vinyl top resting on this aluminium frame. And at speed, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that water will get pushed up under here in the rain and find its way into the car. There's not even a gutter system on this runner here. It just leads straight down towards the headlining here. So although it would be nice to leave this, we've pretty much decided it's not a good idea. It's also going to vibrate like crazy when you're doing high speed in the car. So the plan at the moment, I don't want to sort of commit to this at the moment because it's dependent on cost to some extent, is we're thinking about doing a moulded glass roof, a shaped glass roof for it, with an electronic LCD darkening system in it. So you can have a blacked out roof, or you can lighten it up to have a clear glass roof and anywhere between. So that's the plan with that at the minute. Pretty exciting project. We're going to sort of crack on with more of the design work for that in the coming weeks and probably do some renderings for the overall look so we can decide on the wheels, the changes we're going to make. There's not that much in the way of radical changes we're planning, but there are things that just aren't nice on it. The bumpers are a horrible shape. The front bumper doesn't follow the shape of the car at all. It looks like it's off a different car. The back one's not particularly pleasing either, so we're definitely going to do something with the bumpers. Some of the lights we might have a look at. The indicators and side lights and the rear lights look very much Lucas parts bin of the time, like Minis and Land Rovers, so it would be nice to do a slight update on those. Even I don't want to totally change them, but just a slight update. Right, follow me this way. Slurping boiled pig. No, cow. Pork bovril. Now this is a suggestion we should make. We've been carrying on with the exhaust fabrication on Kaiser 2. That is getting there, so next week we'll have a look at that. That should be done next week. Let's have a little look through here. Hey, avoid that trip hazard. Okay, so we've had a little pause on the Morris this week, and we've been putting a bit of focus onto the Camaro, which has been on the cards for a while. The car was paused for quite a long while at the customer's request. I'll just go around this side. Whoop. So the stage we paused it at was very near to completion of metalwork. And there has been a lot of metalwork on this. It's almost a similar story to the Mustang, in that this car was actually bought from the States from a really well-known classic car dealer in the States as a near-perfect restored car. And the original plan was not to touch the paintwork on it, but to mechanically update it with more modern running gear. Unfortunately, when we started that, we got it stripped to a certain degree and then found there was some suspicious-looking rust holes in the floor that didn't go all the way through. And then we found it had been repaired in the floor by dropping and bonding in new like floor pan repair sections with just sealer and just sticking them in. And that then raised our eyebrows about what the quality of the work on the rest of the car might be like. So had a bit of a painful conversation with the owner saying, look, I'm not convinced this has been restored that well, and the worst thing we want to do is go through all of this and then find, you know, we get rust coming through somewhere on it. So we, after a bit of consultation, had a dig at the bodywork with a grinder in a few places, and there was probably 10 to 15 mil of filler in lots of it, where it was covering up sort of badly repaired quarters. So it had a lower quarter welded in, and the weld line had distorted quite badly and had a huge amount of filler making that up. And then we just kept finding more and more. So the windscreen apertures had little patches of metal bonded in all the way around to repair them. And there was just shoddy work like that throughout. So actually, from what started as a pristine restored Camaro when it arrived, has now had every panel that's black replaced. So the roof, the quarters, the rear panel, the boot floor, the complete doors, the floor pans, the dash top, the rear deck. So it turned out, to be honest, as we and the owner now realise, he should have just bought a rough one and have been done with it. But it's one of those things. It's you never know. It's a learning process for people buying classic cars. So the main thing is it's now very solid. We've done all of the mechanical upgrade, and the beauty of working on something like this is there's so much available in the States. So the whole front subframe was an item we bought from the States, as was the rear axle and all the rear axle location system. It's got a crate Chevy LS3 in it. Most of our work in the engine bay has been creating a sort of really attractive inner wing and sort of engine bay surround metalwork, which isn't fitted at the moment. And then we've got a section that sits sort of centrally over the engine, which just adds a really nice feature to it. It sort of replicates the shape of this bulge in the bonnet here. And also it gives us a really nice way to hide some of the plumbing, so the air intake pipe is hidden under there. We've got some of the fuel lines hidden under there, and the wiring to parts of the engine. So it's just going to look a really nice minimal engine bay, and that's unboltable obviously for servicing reasons. So yeah, that's where we're at. We're now doing the dry build process on the car. So we're fitting up everything that we want to be sure needs to fit right before we finish. So things like the electric window conversions, we've bolted those in to make sure they fit the new doors. We've got the door handles in because, of course, new doors doesn't necessarily guarantee that everything fits. I think one of these did need filing out a fair bit to get the door handle on. We're getting all the glass in there. We've fitted up the lights to make sure they all fit, because again, they're all going onto new panels, and there's just no guarantee with reproduction panels that everything fits like it should. So that's basically what the process we're doing on this at the moment is, just getting that dry build finished. We've got a little bit more to do. We've got the heater and aircon unit in. We're going to do some bezels to fit some different vents in there, and then we're going to design a new central section of the dash which will house additional air vents, the climate control controls, the audio controls, and then we're going to do a revised centre console that goes in here that's just a bit more attractive and works with the manual shifter and has a bit more modern functionality. So electric window switches, somewhere to put your phone, controller for the audio system, and that's about where we're at with that one. So it'd be nice to just push through the final metalwork on this, get all of that dry build finished, a little bit of finessing of the shut lines and some lead work to do on it, and then that one will be over to be blasted, zinc sprayed, and over to gas, which is basically the position the Mustang's just reached. Next one, the Chevette. So last week we saw that being blasted and prepared for metalwork. So we've now got this mounted on our jig, and we've just made the first steps into rust repair. So we've started with this inner wing. We've done a whole new wing top rail here, repaired this section where the headlight is, done a repair lower down the pillar here. We've taken this reinforcer off here, which I think was actually taken off before blasting, so we could make sure the area under it was blasted and cleaned up, and so we'll make a new reinforcer to go on there. And we're just going to carry on plodding through the rust repair on it, which is the first step really. And once we've done all the rust repair, we'll then start on doing the modification work on the shell and the dry build with all the mechanical parts. And that's something that's been happening this week. I think I spoke last time about a lot of my time was ordering parts. Well, a lot of those parts have started to come now. So big delivery came yesterday from Camillus Bradley in Ireland. That would be a fully built, fully floating Atlas rear axle, which is an axle normally used in Mark II Escort rally cars, but it's just a great go-to axle because everything is available new. It's a strong axle. So we've gone for an axle built by him. It's left in just a bare metal finish at the moment because we need to decide exactly the spacing for the location brackets on it and fully weld those on. They've just been left tacked by him. Once we've done that, we'll strip it all apart, powder coat the casing, and then put it all back together again for the final time. We got a Quaife 6-speed sequential gearbox from him, Tilton pedal box, so we've gone for a floor mount Tilton box with the cylinders back under your heels, so there'll be like a false floor section under your heels that cover the master cylinders. The Quaife sequential will be mated to a Vauxhall C20XE, or red top as most people call it, which we're going to have a dummy engine to use for our mock-up build while the actual engine is built. So one thing that's going to be arriving shortly will be all the ancillary parts, so the dry sump pan, the throttle bodies, the alternator, starter motor, basically all the external parts that affect space in the engine bay. So we can just get our dummy engine, bolt all those parts on, get it in there with the gearbox, get it all mounted up, and then start planning the fabrication work in the engine bay to suit. We've got the wheels from Camillus as well, so Revolution 5 spokes, a fairly traditional choice for a rally car in the UK. We're going to refinish them in a different colour further down the line, but for the moment we'll leave them in the white finish that they came while we're doing all the mock-up build. What else did we get? We got all the link brackets for the axle, so the axle's going to be 5 linked. It'll have boxes fabricated into the body shell at the back there and then tied into a cross member that we will fabricate, which sits across roughly at the front of where the original seat base used to be in the back. And then it'll be 4 trailing arms and a panhard rod. Again, fairly standard setup for an escort rally car, and that transfers over quite nicely to the Chevette. Now the works Chevette cars had a different setup, so the grey car that we built previously, which was a competition build, had the works setup, which is where the spring pans actually sit onto the lower arm, so you have a very strong lower arm, still 4-link but with a very strong lower arm, that the spring, a separate spring rather than a coilover, sits directly onto, and then just the damper sits into the turret at the back. Whereas on this one, because we're not trying to meet any sort of historic specs with it, we're just going with coilovers into a fabricated turret, much like you would on a Mark II Escort Group 4 rally car. Another thing of note is that on the other competition car we built, it had a longer wheelbase, which was something that the works cars had. They added around 100mm in the wheelbase, essentially cut the chassis leg behind the front cross member and extended it forward and refabricated the inner wing to bring the front cross member around 100mm further forward, to give the car a longer than standard wheelbase, which we did on the other car, but we're not going to do on this. This is essentially a road toy, so we're doing it fairly rally spec, but without any of the things that you'd need to do to make it as per an original works rally car, because they're just unnecessary to do. It would be excessive work for a car that's not trying to meet any sort of historic regulations. So yeah, lots of parts arriving, rust repair underway, and very shortly we'll be getting onto the more exciting work of starting to do all the fabrication regarding axle location, engine, gearbox, etc. So excited to see this one taking shape. And the other thing that's big change is Utah. So I think last week we saw Gaz was literally just starting final paint of the shell. He'd done the paint on the engine bay and he was just doing the exterior paint. That's obviously now finished. He's done another batch of paint work on it, which is all the doors, which are now bolted up to the shell. And he's literally, I'm looking over to the booth over there, he's literally just about to start the final batch, which is the boot lid, bonnet and the rear arch spats, which we made for it. So a few people were asking about the paint process. We've probably talked a bit about this before. If you look back over the Gordon Murray videos, there's an episode somewhere in there, I should have checked this before doing this, but there's an episode where I talk a fair bit about the paint process. But as a very whistle-stop tour, it basically starts with the completion of metalwork. We blast the car again and zinc metal spray the underside, which if you look at the last Uncut episode, we were doing that on the Mustang. We then seal all of the rest of the shell immediately with an epoxy primer. So at that point, we've got a shell that's freshly blasted, sealed in with a non-porous coating whilst it's still bare metal and before it's had any chance to get any surface corrosion, because it's done literally immediately after blasting. Then we start the seam sealing work, so manually seam sealing everything underneath as neatly as possible, but in a way where there'll definitely be no way of getting moisture into those seams. We then do all of the basic filler work, block sanding to get everything dead straight. Once we've done that initial sanding, we'll do an all-over coat of polyester, which is essentially just a sprayable filler. But it means you're sanding an even surface all over, because when you're sanding between filler and metal, the filler sands quicker. So no matter how firm a block you use, you always find that there's a slight variation. So we do an all-over polyester coat, block sand that until we're happy that that's all flat and how we want it to be. Then we'll go over that with another coat of epoxy primer. All of this is sanded dry at this point because it's a porous material. Seal it all in with epoxy primer. It's then no longer a porous material on the outside of the car. So we can then do the final sanding, which we do wet, which we take up to 800 grit. And we do that wet because if you do it dry, you'll always get some amount of clogging of the paper, and the little clogs in the paper then leave little score marks where you've been sanding. So wet sand to 800, and that's basically the final step before final paint. So once we've got that epoxy sanded to 800, final paint goes on. And then once the final paint's done on everything, which is what Gaz is doing on Project Utah now, and that's had a good amount of time to cure, we'll then go through the sanding and polishing process on the final paint finish, which I won't go into now because we'll cover that when we're actually doing it on Utah. So that's that. That's pretty much this week's progress. One thing I'm going to quickly mention is we have a website which we've had for years. If you haven't been on it, all of the projects are covered on there photographically and talked about. But we also have a shop where we sell the clothing that we wear. So these hoodies, the t-shirts that we're wearing, we started selling these probably, I'd say, a year or two ago. And they're a really good quality thing. We've sort of chosen to wear these in the workshop because we were happy, having tried a few other things, that they stand the test of time. The print stuff is all done by a local screen printing company. So that seems to stand the test of time. Our clothes are being washed day in, day out, they're worn by all the guys, and they really do stand the test of time. So you are able to buy these in our web shop. We do international sales. Everything is shipped out via DHL, so for people who are further away, it probably isn't going to be economical because the shipping costs are going to be high, unless you can kind of gather a group of mates together and do a bulk order. UK stuff's DHL, but it's pretty reasonably priced, and the European shipping isn't too bad. So if you want to wear the hoodies we're wearing, the shirts we're wearing, go onto our web shop and grab yourself one. And also, I've never said this before because we don't like the sort of typical YouTube bullshit, but you can subscribe to our channel, and you'll obviously then get a notification every time we put a new video out, which is, at the moment, every week. You know what, 13, 14 weeks ago, when we said we were going to start doing these, I thought we had no chance of managing one every week. And I think, without fail, so far, we've managed one every week. So good going, and we'll see you next week on that note. Bye. That's a stick. Everybody likes a long stick.